Before we begin, I just want to let you know that my other channel, Somewhere Sinister, is back up and running. I've got Season 4 complete and I'm working on Season 5, so the channel should be up and going for quite a while now. There's a link in the description. Check it out. In 2009, women began going missing in Bradford, West Yorkshire, England. The women lived high-risk lifestyles, and many people thought they may have just run off to deal with their problems elsewhere. But in 2010, the manager of an apartment building would see something on one of the surveillance cameras that would put the town of Bradford into the national spotlight. This is Monsters. Stephen Griffiths was born on December 24, 1969 in West Yorkshire, England. His father, also Stephen, worked for a frozen food company and his mother Moira was a telephone operator. The couple would end up having two more children, a daughter Caroline, born in 1972, and a son Philip, born in 1976. The relationship didn't last, and in 1982 Stephen Sr. and Moira divorced. Stephen had already been a quiet child, and the separation of his parents caused him to withdraw further. The couple tried to help Stephen by enrolling him in the Queen Elizabeth Grammar School when he was a teenager, hoping the prestigious school would be a turning point for him. That was the same school the acid bath killer, aka John Haig, attended before he went on to murder at least 6 people between 1944 and 1949. Stephen didn't really excel the way they had hoped, though. He became interested in weapons and martial arts, which in turn caused him to regularly get in trouble for bringing knives and ninja stars to class. He would end up leaving school at 17 years old and wandered the town with no real direction. In 1987, Stephen was caught shoplifting from a local store, and when the owner tried to stop him, Stephen pulled a knife and slashed the man's face. The man needed 19 stitches, and Stephen was sentenced to 3 years in a youth detention facility. He was released on good behavior a year and a half later. He had gotten psychiatric treatment while locked up, and he continued the treatment after his release, which kept him stable, but he wasn't able to find a job. He didn't return to his family and ended up a drifter. Stephen had developed an interest in the behavior of criminals, and shortly after his release from the youth detention facility, he enrolled in a psychology course at Bradford College. His probation officer helped him get an apartment in the area, and it just so happened to be right around the corner from where another notable British killer had lived. The Yorkshire Ripper, aka Peter Sutcliffe, had lived just around the corner, about 350 feet or 100 meters away from Stephen's new home. Peter Sutcliffe had murdered at least 13 people and injured many others between 1975 and 1980. Bradford College was right next to the University of Bradford, so there was a lot of student activity in the area and would normally be a great place to socialize and make friends. But Stephen wasn't interested in that. He remained withdrawn and solitary. His delusions and paranoia made him a danger to those around him. In 1991, he approached a group of 4 young women at the college, pulled a knife, held it to one of the girls' throats and said, quote, "What are you laughing at, little girl?" He walked away without hurting any of them, but a few days later one of the women's fathers confronted Stephen and the troubled young man pulled a knife on him as well. After being arrested, Stephen was evaluated by a psychiatrist who reported that he seemed to be attracted to the idea of killing. Stephen was convicted of 2 counts of affray, which is fighting in public, and 1 count of possessing an offensive weapon in public. He was sentenced to 2 years behind bars, and while locked up, prison guards noticed that he was developing a disturbing fascination with other notorious criminals. A prison psychiatric nurse was so concerned that he even sent a note to the governor with a warning after Stephen had told him, quote, "What Sutcliffe did was nothing. I'm going to outdo him. He was a pussycat compared to me." Despite the warning, Stephen was released in 1993. Stephen appeared to get his life together, and in 1997, he started working on a bachelor's degree in psychology at Leeds University. During that time, he dated a few girls and they would later recount his peculiarities. He would stuff cotton into his ears because he was afraid of insects crawling into them when he slept. He would also get very upset if anyone touched his hair. His apartment became like a museum of murder. He collected books about serial killers and had magazines and DVDs about the topic. He had weapons, including a crossbow, hanging on his walls. He had told one of his girlfriends that he lived with his parents for 2 years before finally coming clean and bringing her to his apartment. She would later say she was horrified to see where he lived. She said she pretended to be sick so Stephen would take her home, and then she broke up with him over the phone the next day. Another girlfriend said their relationship started off normal, but Stephen increasingly let his true self come through. He began telling her about his obsession with Peter Sutcliffe and his plan to become bigger than the Yorkshire Ripper. Eventually, she left the relationship due to his increasingly disturbing behavior. In 2000, Stephen started dating a woman named Kathy Hancock. Kathy had her own place about 20 miles or 32 kilometers away where she lived with her 2 dogs, Yoshi and Taz. Stephen wasn't happy that she was independent and that he had to share her attention with the pets. So one day, while his girlfriend was at his apartment in Bradford, he drugged her. When she began feeling sick, he admitted to giving her pills that weren't supposed to be mixed with her current medication, all while laughing about it. He wouldn't allow her to call emergency services, so she drove herself to the hospital, and while she was there, he took her dogs to a campground and gave them away. When Kathy was released, he told her that her apartment had been burglarized and that all the thieves took were the dogs. Not feeling like she could stay in her apartment without her pets, she moved into Stephen's place with him. An old neighbor eventually told her that Stephen had taken the dogs, and he ultimately admitted the truth. From there, the relationship quickly became physically abusive. Kathy had self-defense training and would fight back, but it only seemed like Stephen enjoyed that more. When Kathy finally decided to leave him, she went into hiding for months before moving back in with her parents. Stephen spent the next 9 years stalking and harassing Kathy, though. Once he got a puppy and called her up to let her know he had chopped off its tail. Kathy convinced him to let her take the puppy, and he agreed. She took out multiple restraining orders, and Stephen would patiently wait until they expired and would immediately be in contact with her. Stephen had spent years harassing other women as well and was arrested multiple times for it. In 2009, though, Stephen shifted his focus to his longtime goal. In 2004, Stephen had enrolled at the University of Bradford to attempt to get a PhD in homicide studies. He spent most of the next 5 years studying on his own. He would occasionally attend lectures, but much of the work for his thesis was done with his own books or at the local library. It was around the time his relationship with Kathy ended that Stephen started surrounding himself with reptiles. At first he had snakes, but eventually started bringing home monitor lizards as pets. He would eventually have 4 that were around 3 feet or 1 meter long. He would use a harness and a leash to take them on walks, which earned him the nickname the Lizard Man by his neighbors. In mid-2009, 43-year-old Susan Rushworth had been getting her life back together. The mother of 3 had gone through a rehab program to kick her heroin addiction and had been clean for 6 weeks. She had moved back in with her mother and was repairing the relationship she had with her children, 2 that were adults and the youngest, who was 9. Susan Thompson was born on December 31, 1965, the last of 3 children to Barry and Christine Thompson. She grew up in the Bradford area and had a relatively normal childhood. When she was 17 years old, she suffered a brain hemorrhage that she just barely survived. She lost control of her right arm and her ability to speak and had to relearn how to use both. In 1984, almost a year after the health scare, she married David Rushworth and they went on to have 3 children together. Unfortunately, their marriage fell apart and the couple divorced in 1994. That left Susan vulnerable, and she eventually started socializing with what her family called the wrong crowd. Eventually, she moved in with a boyfriend who didn't treat her well, and she started self-medicating with heroin. Then she started selling herself to afford her habit. It wasn't until 2009 that Susan left her boyfriend and borrowed enough money from her mother to enter a rehab program. She had completed the program, and her family said she was doing well and excited about her life. Then, on June 22nd, Susan disappeared. Where others might have assumed she had slipped back into her old life of drugs and sex work, her family knew different. Susan had sold herself, but she hadn't gotten very deep into the lifestyle, and while she was in the throes of addiction, she had never lost touch with her family. She had never gone missing before and hadn't moved around a lot like other sex workers had. Susan had epilepsy and took medication, and she hadn't taken any of it with her when she left, meaning she hadn't planned on staying out that long. The day she disappeared, she was on her way to meet a friend and never showed up, which raised red flags with her family. About a week after the disappearance, the police issued an information appeal to the media. They gave out Susan's description, and officers canvassed the area where she was last seen, but no information was uncovered. Just before Christmas of that year, Susan's children made a desperate plea for any information that could help them find their mother, but nothing came in and her family's hope faded. Almost a year would pass before another woman in the area would go missing. 31-year-old Shelley Armitage was captured on a surveillance camera on Sunbridge Road in Bradford at 10:09 p.m. on April 26, 2010. She was on camera for 15 seconds, and it would be the last time she was ever seen. Shelley was born on September 22, 1978, the oldest of 3 children born to Daryl and Gil Armitage. She grew up in nearby Shipley, and having her family be devout Roman Catholic, she attended an all-girls Catholic school. She was popular and had a large circle of friends while at school. It was after she graduated that she began experimenting with drugs, and despite her parents spending their savings on various rehab programs, her addiction only got worse. Shelley eventually turned to sex work in order to fund her habit, and other women in the area said she was outgoing and fiercely protective of the other workers. In April of 2009, Shelley was in the car with her boyfriend who was driving drunk. After being stopped, they attacked the officer and both were arrested. In March of 2010, Shelley pleaded guilty to 1 count of assault and 2 counts of possessing a knife and was scheduled to be sentenced on May 17th, a court date she would never make it to. Shelley's friends and family began looking everywhere for her, but just like with Susan, there were no clues. Shelley was well-liked and many women in the area knew her, but despite the wide net that was cast over the town, Shelley was nowhere to be found. It turned out that the last person to have seen Shelley was a fellow sex worker named Bridget Farrell. Bridget was friends with Stephen Griffiths, and a few days after Shelley went missing, she ran into him and asked if he had seen her. He strangely replied, quote, "Don't worry, babe, she'll be okay." On May 22, 2010, only 5 days after Shelley had been expected in court, 36-year-old Suzanne blamires would disappear. Suzanne was born on February 26, 1974, the oldest of 3 children born to Norman and Maria blamires. Norman was a car salesman, and he eventually started his own business with a growing string of dealerships in the area. It offered the family a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle, and Suzanne did well at the school that was attached to the local Roman Catholic Church. After that, she began a course in nursing at a college in Bradford. It was there that she made a lot of friends, and her social life became more important than her studies. Friends would later say that Suzanne had a very sheltered childhood, and they believed that she wanted to break free of that. In July of 1994, Suzanne married her friend's brother, Simon McGinnis, and Norman disliked Simon so much that he refused to go to the wedding. Getting married didn't slow down her partying, and eventually she was kicked out of school. She had become addicted to heroin, and like the other 2 missing women before her, she turned to sex work to support her drug habit. By the end of the 1990s, she had separated from her husband, and her new boyfriend had also got her hooked on crack. In the early morning hours of May 22nd, Suzanne had spent some time with a friend and fellow sex worker before her friend left to meet with someone else. That was the last time Suzanne was ever seen. Stephen Griffiths had boasted about becoming more famous than the Yorkshire Ripper, calling him a pussycat compared to him, but that prediction would never come to fruition. Stephen was a fairly careless criminal, and he made 2 pretty big mistakes that led to his capture. After Shelley had been seen on surveillance on Sunbridge Road, she went back to Stephen's apartment with him. There, he shot her with a crossbow and dismembered her body in his bathtub. Not only that, but he recorded the dismemberment on his phone, which he would later accidentally leave on a train where it was found and delivered to the authorities. Then, after Stephen had brought Suzanne back to his apartment, she managed to escape and run down the hallway in his apartment building, a hallway that had a surveillance camera. Stephen can be seen chasing Suzanne with a crossbow in his hand. When he caught up with her, he knocked her out and dragged her back to the doorway of his apartment. Then he calmly walked back down the hall and retrieved the crossbow. Once he returned to Suzanne's body, he shot her in the head with the crossbow and then dragged her inside. About 20 minutes later, he can be seen on the footage leaving his apartment, and as he's walking down the hall, he looks up and notices the camera. He raised his hand and flipped off the camera before returning to his apartment. His landlord saw the footage and immediately called the authorities. On May 24th, about 60 officers arrived at the apartment complex and approached the door to apartment 33. When they kicked it down, Stephen was inside and he called out, quote, "I'm in here." He was arrested and taken to the station. Inside the apartment, police searched for any sign of Suzanne, hoping she was still alive. In the surveillance footage, Stephen could be seen firing the crossbow at the woman, but it was unknown if the injury had killed her. Unfortunately, inside the killer's apartment, there was no sign of Suzanne, but after seeing his collection of books, magazines, and DVDs, it was clear she was likely no longer alive. When Stephen was interrogated, he openly confessed to killing Susan Rushworth, Shelley Armitage, and Suzanne blamires. Then he said he had actually killed 6 women, and he told the investigators that it had all been carried out by his alter ego, then pariah. He went on to matter-of-factly detail how he had murdered, dismembered, and disposed of his victims, 3 which he had eaten part of. He explained that he had murdered Susan in his bedroom by hitting her in the head with a hammer. Then he dismembered her and cooked and ate part of her flesh. He told investigators that he disposed of her remains and had gotten rid of the oven that he used to cook the flesh. He said he went without an oven for a few months before getting another one. He said that Shelley's DNA would likely be found in that one, but he ate the parts of Susan raw. He told the investigators that he had studied homicide and that he was good at disposing of remains. He assured the authorities that they would never find the remains of any of his victims. The next day, a black backpack was found floating in the river Aire in Shipley. It had gotten stuck near the bank of the river, and when it was pulled from the water, inside were human remains. Soon the area was cordoned off, and divers were in the river searching for evidence. They recovered a large black wheeled canvas bag that contained knives, a hacksaw, razor blades, and a large quantity of human tissue. The remains in the backpack were later determined to belong to Suzanne, and the remains in the larger backpack belonged to Shelley. No remains of Susan have ever been found. A search of his apartment uncovered 2 crossbows, his computer, 30 knives, and a digital camera. Susan's blood was found in his bedroom, and other blood was found in the bathroom. The cell phone that Stephen had lost on the train was picked up by a group of friends who were able to unlock the phone and see the footage. They ended up selling the phone before it was eventually turned over to the police and included with the mountain of evidence against Stephen. His claims of 3 other murdered women could never be substantiated. Records of missing women in the area were reviewed, but none of them matched what Stephen had described. When Stephen was brought to court for the first time and asked to state his name, he responded, quote, "The Crossbow Cannibal." Then when he was asked to state his address, he said, quote, "Here, I guess." Stephen is one of those douchebag monsters who wanted to use murder to get attention and make himself feel cool. There are obviously a lot of murderers who commit the heinous act for other reasons. Even if it's premeditated, they aren't proudly swaggering into court proclaiming themselves to be a cannibal. Stephen is one of the worst kinds of murderers because being caught actually gave him what he wanted, and that's to see the shock on people's faces. In this case, he's in court getting to soak in the shock and horror of his victims' family members as he acts callous in front of the judge. While in prison awaiting trial, Stephen was discovered in his cell with a plastic bag around his head and a sock tied around his neck. A guard quickly resuscitated him, and the prison doctor said he hadn't suffered any damage. Prison staff said that Stephen's story had recently been knocked off of the front page of the news after Derek Bird killed 12 people during a shooting spree in Cumbria on June 2, 2010. They said they believe Stephen was attempting to redirect attention back to himself. After being evaluated by psychiatrists and deemed fit to plead, Stephen Griffiths pleaded guilty to the 3 counts of murder on December 21, 2010. The same day, he was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order, meaning he would not be up for parole and would never be released. Despite the knowledge that the monster that killed her daughter will never harm anyone else, Suzanne's mother says he's not the only one in prison. She said, quote, "I wake up and think about my bright, articulate, and much-loved daughter every day, and I am serving a life sentence as a result of what this man has done." If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave us a comment. You can check out our other show, Somewhere Sinister, on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.